Hello and welcome to my video on neuroplasticity. My name is Ria and I am actually a CPA by trade. However, I am an aspiring mental health superstar. I went through an accident about 4 years ago, and since then I have had chronic pain, and I have been researching about neuroplasticity, and so we will be talking about that today. So by no means am I an expert. I am simply doing research, and then with my own knowledge from my injuries, as well as the x-rays and reports that go along with that, as well as talking to my doctors. I'll shed a little bit of insight on what I know, and I would be very interested on hearing if anyone had any comments as well. Okay, so the two types of brain plasticity. Basically, we want to talk about what it is first. It's the brain's ability to change and adapt. So we're very used to this idea that the brain is fixed, when in fact it's more like molding clay, in the idea that we can increase our brain synapses, and by that we can create these new neural pathways and new habits. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so structural plasticity, the experiences or memories that change a brain's physical structure. Okay, so of course, if we have this happy childhood experience where we are developing and we're growing, we're exploring here with some science experiments and blocks, of course, we're going to have a much more different upbringing than if we were in an unstable home. So that is talking about structural plasticity. And then here we have functional plasticity. Brain functions move from a damaged area to an undamaged area. So we'll talk about that a little bit. I don't know as much about this area, so I will be doing more research and possibly future videos. I know some members in the depression group that I have been a part of have had much more experience with, I believe it's called ECG machines, where they have these, they're connected to these electronic or electrical impulse machines, I believe, and therefore they can rewire their brain that way. Okay, so in the next picture, we'll be talking about synapses. So I just want to define this quickly. There's a small pocket of space between the two cells where they can pass messages to communicate. And so they play a vital role in process of memory formation. Myself, synapses, it's hard for me to define this. However, when I had my brain and spinal injury about 4 years ago, I was put on brain rest by my doctor for about 3 months, where I was told not to read anything, not to watch any TV, don't go on the phone, basically don't learn or try to make your brain work. My job was to rest my brain so that I wouldn't have these chronic symptoms that I was having, such as increased neck pain, increased migraines, etc. The list can go on and on. And so at that time when I had my injury, I eventually, when I was put off brain rest and I started reading again, I read a book by Dr. Deepak Chopra about increasing your brain synapses and therefore basically repairing those parts of my brain that I had damaged. Okay, so let's just look at this picture here of neuroplasticity. And again, it's the ability to reorganize itself or rewire itself. Basically, it's getting rid of old habits and forming new ones. Is a very simple way to look at it. So both in structure and how it functions. Okay, so here we can see there's first the neurogenesis. So what neurogenesis is this continuous generation of new neurons in certain brain regions. So this is basically what I was talking about when I was reading that book after the 3-month brain rest, after the accident. I was reading about increasing my brain synapses to repair that part of my brain. Well, that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to generate new neurons in the certain brain regions that I would have damaged. And I'll talk about a little later, but the prefrontal cortex, I had experienced, I now know that that is one of the parts of my brain that really was damaged, and that has a lot to do with my emotions and how I react to certain things, certain stressful situations, whether I will yell right away or whether I'll have a more rational response. And so we'll talk about that a little later. So with the neurogenesis, what we want to have happen is this new synapses to create. So how do we create new synapses? How do we basically repair or grow our brain? Well, we can pick up new skills and experiences, and this creates our new neural pathways. And in fact, even when you're taking your dog for a walk, you may have a certain path that you go. Well, I welcome you to even change that path slightly, and if then you're creating a new pathway in your brain. Physically and metaphorically, and so you're kind of mapping out a new foreign space for yourself. And so that in and of itself would create a new synapse. So you're not doing a new activity, you're still walking, but you're going in a new location. Now, of course, you could, if you always go for walks, now maybe you might pick up rollerblading or a similar activity, and that would create a new synapse for a different reason. And then, of course, when we create new synapses, and as well with our existing synapses that we have, we want to strengthen these synapses by doing repetition and practicing. So one example here, Grace just got a piano for her birthday, a little keyboard, and she is in lessons. And when I picked up the keyboard, the gentleman mentioned that the previous man that he had sold a piano to, he bought the most expensive piano, and his rationalization was that if he spent that much on a piano, then there was no way he was going to get bored with it and give up on the piano if he spent that much money, if he invested that much money. Now, of course, spending X amount of dollars, spending more money on a piano will not directly correlate and produce results in the fact that it won't necessarily make you practice. However, maybe for him, that would give him the motivation to at least strengthen those synapses. So that was his rationalization for spending so much on a piano. Of course, I went another route. Grace just got a very simple keyboard, but as well, I am very open to the potential risk that she could get bored with the keyboard, or myself included. And then, after about a month or so, it's kind of like a wasted skill. And then that new synapse that was created would weaken and eventually deteriorate and die. Now, instead of having that happen, we want to practice and strengthen those synapses. Okay, and then of course we were talking about weakened synapses. So these are the connections in the brain that aren't used. So of course, if we have a specific skill and we're not using it, well, our skill may deteriorate. Now, however, what we want to do is, instead of focusing on having our good synapses weakened, we want to strengthen the skills that we are working on. And then let's weaken those synapses that are no longer serving us. Now, for me, I have realized that I have been giving a lot of power to the pain in my body. Now, doubt, there's no doubt that I have pain in my body, a lot of pain in my body from the snowboarding accident. I was hit in the back of the head and ran over by a snowboarder that lost control. From that, as well as I have had accidents, other sporting accidents after that, collisions with other sporting mates, and so that certainly hasn't helped with my pain, having those repeated concussions. Now, what I want to do and what I'm focusing on, and it'll make more sense near the summary, is I want to focus on weakening the synapses where I'm giving power to that chronic pain. So I've had chronic pain for 4 years, and I bet that a lot of people, if you are watching this video, a lot of people would relate to having chronic pain. A lot of people have back pain, neck pain, jaw pain. I have quite a bit of jaw pain, and everything is interconnected. My jaw and neck, especially my right side of my jaw and my left side of my neck, and that might make sense to a lot of people. If you do have similar injuries, maybe you have the left side of your lower back and your right side of your neck. I often find that our body is connected to the opposite side of the body. Now, of course, I'm not a medical professional. However, I have been doing a lot of my own research, as well as gaining knowledge from professionals that I've seen on my own time. Okay, so this picture was actually quite confusing to me when I first saw it, but it is talking about the synapses and how we can, if it's weak activation, then it doesn't change the synapse. But if it's a strong and frequent activation, then that can change that synapse structure. And in fact, then that connection would strengthen, and then a new synapse. The implication would be that a new synapse would be created. So for this example, learning needs ongoing reinforcement. And so basically with creating new synapses, it's not enough to just create those new synapses. You need that ongoing reinforcement to continually grow. Okay, so quite simply, I really like this picture. It's a little overwhelming at first. There's a lot going on. However, it very simply breaks it down. So neural pathways, they connect the distant areas of the brain or the nervous system. So the nervous system being the brain and the spinal cord. Now, each pathway that we have is associated with a particular action or behavior. So think about those actions that you do subconsciously without thinking. For me, I have a very nervous action of biting my nails. Now, I've done this since I was a kid. My mom also bit her nails. And so I have created this pathway since I was a very young child. And so this is a very, very strong pathway of a very negative action of chewing my nails. And so I definitely could, and I have stopped chewing my nails for periods of time, mostly when I'm not working because I'm less stressed. But then once I start, chewing my nails again, then that pathway gets strengthened again. So that is obviously my bad habit. Now, instead of focusing on trying to break my bad habits, what I'm trying to focus on is I'm trying to focus on creating new good habits. And so I really like this picture because it's taking brain synapses, learning new skills, which create new synapses, and that is in turn creating this new neural pathway in the brain system. And strengthening this pathway will create a habit. And habits, we're very used to this word habit, but I was very surprised when I just read the simple definition. Habits are well-traveled pathways. So we know what habits are to us. For me, my habit is, chewing my nails, smoking when I'm driving. Okay, obviously when I don't have grace. Um, but those are some of my bad habits. Now, I do want to have a balanced discussion. So a good habit that I have is I'm very positive when I meet people. I always try to find the good in people. So that has always been that is a well-strengthened pathway that has been instilled in me. And I believe that that pathway is also from my mother, because I've witnessed her constantly since my birth being extremely kind, extremely outgoing and talkative to other people, and always finding the good in people, always smiling. And so that pathway is also a very strong pathway. So I obviously want to keep that pathway, but the pathways that I want to weaken are my pain pathways. I don't want to give any more power to that. And then of course, I want to strengthen new neural pathways that will actually serve me in my newfound path. Okay, so now with neuroplasticity, all we're doing, this neuroplasticity of, again, sounds like a very complicated subject, but when we break it down, it's just creating new thoughts and skills. So carving out new pathways. So we can probably think of something new that we've tried last week. People are constantly, trying new recipes or new activities, etc. And then, of course, we just want to repeat and practice that skill or that habit or that feeling, that good feeling, or fake smiling if we need to fake smile that actually releases those feel good chemical hormones that can actually trick our brain into feeling good. And so we want to strengthen those pathways and form new habits. And then in that sense, because we're focusing our attention on strengthening these new neural pathways that actually serve us in a positive way, then we are actually getting rid of these old pathways that get used less, and then they weaken. And so what I'm hoping, and what perhaps other people may hope, is if they're suffering from mental illness, such as myself with depression, anxiety. My anxiety has been really bad this past week, especially. And I do kind of know the cause of that as well. A lot of I've had to revisit some old areas of my life, metaphorically, that has made these old anxiety feelings resurface. Okay, and so then I'm giving new power to it. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to weaken those pain pathways and the depression and anxiety pathways, where I'm actually giving power to my depression and pain, instead of actually trying to find a different way. Okay, so the brain, of course, there's a lot more to the brain than what we see in this diagram, but I do like this diagram. We'll talk about a few of the areas here. I won't talk about all of them. I'm definitely not an expert. However, the prefrontal cortex, I do want to talk about this area. They describe it as our thinking brain, the center for creativity and logic. So absolutely, I agree with this, and I'll also add on to it. This area, this prefrontal cortex, also controls our impulses, and it is what I would describe as our primal brain. And so when we are born, we need to develop this prefrontal cortex. We need, when we're a toddler, we may not get our way, and so then we have a temper tantrum. And now over time, we are able to develop our prefrontal cortex and develop our emotional responses to certain environmental circumstances and situations. And then because we are able to develop this part of our brain, we may have more patience, we may have more empathy, understanding, and then that can lead to us making more logical and more sound-based, more rational decisions rather than emotional decisions that come out of anger, jealousy, fear, hate, etc. So when I had that accident, of course I was in a lot of pain following it, but also my mood changed drastically. I was very irritable. I was no longer patient with my daughter. I resorted to yelling, whereas I never was that type of parent before. And so it took me a few years until I realized that my prefrontal cortex had actually been damaged. I had been doing research. And so I finally had that epiphany that is why I had been acting as such an irrational mom sometimes, and yelling um, and acting in ways that I didn't actually want to be as a parent, and I never was prior to the accident. Um, but it took me a long time to realize that I had this damage to my brain. And so now what I actually have to do is I have to create these new brain synapses where in this prefrontal cortex where I work on developing my emotional responses to things, instead of reacting right away with anger, because I can't mentally process something. I really have had to develop my patience, etc. And so that's just my little spiel about the prefrontal cortex. So creating new brain synapses by having certain experiences, such as, let's say, my daughter is giving me a hard time with something, and let's say in the past, my emotional immediate response may be to get upset and yell or discipline her in some fashion, when in fact that may not be the right rational response. And the only way that I can rewire and create a new habit and is by making that conscious choice in that moment to not give in to that prefrontal cortex deficiency that I currently have of not being patient. I honestly feel like when I got knocked over or hit by that, ran over by that snowboarder, that spinal and brain injury actually knocked me back to the emotional responses of a toddler, where if I didn't get my way, I was having an outburst. And I was never like that before. And so, well, of course, when I was a kid, I would have been. And so I really had to recognize that I needed to develop this prefrontal cortex. And so it started with recognizing that I had this damage to my brain. I needed to repair these brain synapses, not only just in the thinking part of my brain, but also in the cognitive area of my brain, but also in the emotional area of my brain. And that is the area of my brain that I had neglected. I had really focused on creating new brain synapses academically, and ensuring that my brain was sound that way. But as far as emotionally, I had probably the biggest deficiency from that accident, and yet I had not pinpointed that problem whatsoever. And so I didn't realize that my emotional responses were not only irrational, but that they can be changed, and that by rewiring my brain, I actually can create new brain synapses. And so I've kind of seen this journey as myself going from, you know, before I was a mature adult, then I had the accident, then I kind of got turned into an emotional toddler. I had the pain, as well as, you know, the irritability and the crankiness from that, and then not being able to control my emotional responses. And so now I would say that I'm probably at, you know, the emotional age of maybe 8 for certain immediate responses, or um, basically I have a lot of I still have a lot of ways to go, lot of rewiring to go before I am back to the emotionally strong and rational person that I was prior to the accident. And so a lot of what it goes back to is when I'm feeling my heart rate rising, when I'm feeling that anger, when I'm seeing red, to remind myself that I I need to develop this prefrontal cortex. And so when I remind myself that, I know that I have that deficiency. And so what I'm feeling, I'm not giving power to. And instead, I'm trying to rewire that brain, and I'm working on staying calm. And so it's been really hard, but it's really made a huge difference with my relationship with my daughter. And a lot of self-reflection has come from it. And so it really takes that step back, and realizing that, okay, if I'm about to yell at Grace for something, newsflash, it's likely not a problem with her whatsoever. It's likely that I have information overload. I'm overwhelmed. I'm finding that I have had that a lot with my brain since the accident, is that if I get too much brain, or if I get too much information at once, if two people are talking to me at one time, it is almost so much information, and so hard on my brain that I have to, like, I get upset and yell that, you know, one person has to talk at a time, instead of saying it in a calm and rational way, because I physically feel like I can't. It's too much overload on my brain. And so it takes that step. It takes that second for me to step back, realize that I have this deficiency in my prefrontal cortex, realize that it is not Grace's fault whatsoever if she is talking in a loud voice, and for some reason the fact that she's being loud and excited, and then the lights are bright. I have a great sensitivity to light. Maybe that combination is making me irritable, and it makes me react immediately without thinking, and so then I'm prone to yell or get upset. And so I really have been focusing on rewiring that brain, noticing that when I'm feeling that way, it's because of other reasons, other than a plausible, rational reason that I should actually get upset for. Okay, so thank you for bearing with me for that little or that long spiel there. Now I'll just talk about a couple other areas of the brain here. They're pointing out the insula. It's our area of empathy and compassion. Okay, the prefrontal cortex, something I didn't mention here, is it says it shrinks with age but can grow back with meditation. So meditation is obviously very extremely beneficial for us. Okay, and the amygdala, that's where the stress lives. And so here, this is why meditation is such a great and proven method to prevent and treat stress is because it actually shrinks the amygdala, which is where our stress lives. So it allows us to stay calm and when we express those stress triggers. Um, okay, and then we have the hippocampus down here. This is well, they describe it as our very own librarian for our memories. So it's our long-term hub of memories. So it helps us tag and store important information. So that's like our, that's where our long-term memory is stored. But it shuts down when we're stressed. And so that's sometimes why our mind can blank. And then, of course, meditation can improve this again. Okay, now through my research, I found an excellent site that showed 9 ways to increase your neuroplasticity and growth development. So again, if you're thinking about your brain, think about it as instead of thinking about it as a rock, something rigid, fixed, think about it as a ball of clay that you can mold, that can grow. You can add little bits of clay to it, and you can really mold and grow it into the brain that you want instead of something that is fixed and rigid like a rock. Okay, so that's kind of the whole idea behind neuroplasticity. And so that's the analogy that I use with the clay, thinking that like plastic, if you think of like a plastic milk jug, well, we can recycle that and it can be turned into something different. Okay, so I will do other videos later on, especially with this number 1, finding clarity. That is basically taking a very deep and inward look at yourself. And there's a couple of really great questions that I had found on this site, and I'm going to list a few of them here. And later in the videos, I will go through them myself and really take that introspective and deep look within myself and be very vulnerable and share, accomplishments and regrets. Of course, it's easy to share accomplishments, but how easy is it to share regrets? Well, those are deep and darkest secrets sometimes. And so by expressing them, we are at least letting them go. We're not giving power to them by hiding them, at least. Okay. So finding clarity, some questions. What are your passions? What are your regrets? What's the biggest challenge you're facing? What do you believe your purpose is? What boxes do you have in your life? By that, I mean, if you think about, if you take a piece of paper and then you section it off into boxes, so just draw lines to make rows and columns. And maybe you have 6 boxes, maybe you have 9, maybe you have 12. But basically what you write in the boxes is you write the things in your life. So you might have family, friends, work, perhaps you have church, the gym, maybe you have swimming, knitting, other activities, anything that is is in your life. And so basically the idea behind the boxes is you want more, not necessarily that you want more boxes, but it's good to have a balance in your life. So you don't want, let's say, just 2 boxes. You don't want just work and family, because then then you're putting way too much of your time in, let's say work and even family. Of course, it's good to give to your family, but then you would be completely draining yourself. You wouldn't have any area of your life where you're feeding your own soul. And so the idea is the more boxes, or at least to have 6 boxes, you have a balance in your life. You have a balance between your friends, your family, your work, your hobbies, perhaps your other educational pursuits, spiritual beliefs, etc. Okay, couple other questions with the finding clarity. One of my questions that I added was, what are your personal assets? Now, as an accountant, typically when I am referring to personal assets, I would mean perhaps you have a house, a bank account, a car, things that you own. However, in this respect, I'm referring to personal assets as your skills. So what are your personal skills? Perhaps you're very patient. Perhaps you have a lot of empathy and understanding for people and their situations. You may have a skill for music or problem solving, physics. Write down your personal assets. What are your skills? And from your personal assets, you can draw direct correlations to from your assets, which are your skills, to the goals that you'd like to accomplish using those assets. Okay. This last question I found to be really inspiring, and it's tied a lot into our discussion later when we talk about procrastination. Now, this one says, what have you given yourself permission to do? What have you not given yourself permission to do? So if we think in life of our goals that we have, a lot of us, if we have some far-fetching goals, such as myself, I would love, love, love to have my own gymnastics, yoga, dance studio one day. Well, I haven't really given myself permission to do that. So no wonder I haven't ever accomplished it, because I've always had the limiting beliefs that, okay, I don't have enough money or capital for that right now. It would take a lot to start up. And I would have made countless excuses for why I have not done that. Before it would have been, I was in school for accounting. I needed to complete all of my exams, etc. And then, life takes a hold, and you keep pushing off your big dreams. And it's not that you don't want to accomplish them, but you have not even given yourself permission to do so. And so once you've given yourself the permission to do so, that it is actually possible and that you can start with any small steps, then we are starting by creating that new brain synapse. And so I have started to gain a little bit more ground on, that part of my life of gymnastics being my happy place, and being a coach for 10 years. I would love to have a gymnastics studio there to grow young minds. Now, having said that, I still have not completely given myself permission to do so, because I've had these limiting beliefs that it's not the right time, it's unstable, I need to support my family, etc. And so if you think about what you have achieved, and then the goals that you want to achieve and you haven't yet, well, think about that question first, if you've even given yourself permission to do so. And by that, I mean, do you believe that it's possible? And have you given yourself permission to get rid of those limiting beliefs that you will fail, etc.? Okay, step 2 is set those meaningful goals. And again, if you don't know where to start, I had a great chiropractor, and basically it was like a life coach and a grandpa to me. And he told me one time, write down all of your assets, your personal assets, your skills, and then from there, draw goals, set your goals that directly relate to your assets. So start there if you don't really have goals in mind. And then remember that any step is a good step. It means that we're moving forward and not backward, and we're focusing our attention on a positive matter. And so take those micro steps and be grateful for those small steps, because at least it's not procrastination. And adopt that growth mindset. Think about the future and not the past, and pretend it's 5 years from now, and visualize what you have succeeded in your goals. And then ask yourself, look back. So you're 5 years from now, and then look back. What did you do at the 3-year mark? And then what did you do at the 1-year mark? So that way, if we're working backwards, we're visualizing, which is a very, very powerful method for the brain. We're visualizing that we've already attained our goals. It's 5 years from now. We've obtained what we've wanted. And now we're looking back, okay, 2 years ago, what did we do at the 3-year mark? And then before that, what did we do at the 1-year mark? That may be easier than thinking, okay, I'm here now. I know where I want to go and be there in 5 years, but I have no idea what the first step is. Well, if we look at it the other way, working backwards, perhaps we will have a different way, a different vision, a different way of looking at things, a different perspective. Okay, and I'm just going to step back very quickly to setting these meaningful goals. When we're setting the meaningful goals, there's basically these 4 main areas in our life that we could set goals. We could have the community, we could have, and that may be a number of different things, but the first one that comes to my mind is perhaps you want to become more involved in some type of activity, let's say lane swimming. So you're becoming more a part of the community there, as well as it also is helps with your health, etc. Okay, the second area would be growth. Giving back is the third, and health. So those are some areas that you could set meaningful goals. Okay, we talked about adopting a growth mindset. Now practice meditation. And this is actually supposed to say practice mindfulness. So obviously I was slightly not mindful when I made this point on my slide, but I was thinking about meditation there. So practice mindfulness. So there's 2 areas of mindfulness: self-awareness and then self-control. So when I was speaking earlier of when I feel my heart rate rising and I start to feel agitated, angry, and I think I'm going to blow up, first I should practice being mindful by being self-aware that I'm feeling those feelings. Recognize that, okay, I may be feeling this, but remember, I had that damage to my prefrontal cortex. I no longer have the patience and the other behavioral behaviors that I had developed over time prior to the accident. So I have to be aware that my feelings may be irrational. And then I am going to practice that self-control by, instead of blowing up, choosing a different option. If I need to give myself a timeout, take a step back, sure, breathe, whatever it needs to be, but practice that self-control. Laugh, that's a really good one when someone upsets you, is laugh. And it's a better response than acting out in anger. Okay. So ways that we can practice mindfulness. Journaling is a great one. A consistent morning routine. meditating, breathing exercises, yoga, reconnecting with nature, and then focusing on your vision and your core values and goals, and being grateful for the small areas in your life. So when I say focus on the vision and the core values and the goals, it very much reminds me of like a mission or a vision statement from a business. Now, think of yourself as a business for a second, and how are you operating? How is the CEO? How is your brain operating? Um, and do you have that? Do you have a vision? Do you have a mission statement for yourself, for your life? A lot of us somewhat have a pretty good idea of where we're going and what we want to accomplish. But if we take a second and think about it in a business sense, what would we write as our mission and our vision statement? So our vision being like our long-term statement, and our mission statement being more of our operating short-term, like within the operating cycle of 1 year, what is our mission statement? What would we provide to our families, to our work colleagues, and to the community at large? So, okay, so mindfulness, self-awareness, self-control. Step 6, selecting the circle of influence, carefully having toxic people eliminated from your life. Now, if you have a dream and you are brave enough to share it with someone, and then immediately they start giving you reasons or excuses or challenges that would prevent you from doing that, well, yes, it's really good to be aware of that. You do need to plan and be aware of the challenges. So it is good that they would be playing devil's advocate to make sure you're aware of the challenges to come. However, they may be projecting their own insecurities and their own limiting beliefs on you, and they may themselves not believed in achieving their goals, and not taken the risks that they would have liked, and so they're almost projecting their negative tendencies on yourself, in fear that if you accomplished what you set out to do and they hadn't, well, then they are inadequate. And so carefully select your circle of friends, and make sure that you really know that the friends are good for you when you share an idea and they are excited, and they know that you can do it, no matter how hard the challenge is. Prioritize an exercise routine. I don't really need to talk about that one. That one's pretty obvious. Stop procrastination. I do want to talk about 2 items there. Okay, 8 for increasing your neuroplasticity and growth development is just stop procrastination. Now, we all procrastinate to a degree, and some people feel as though they do work better under pressure, and therefore they rationalize their procrastination, myself included. Now, after reading what I'm about to tell you, a way that I have started to stop my procrastination is just to write down the thought immediately when it comes to my mind, so that I know that I have to do that task at some point, but I may already be working on something, and so I don't want to detach from that activity. And so I can write down what comes to my mind, and in that way, at least I'm adding it to my list, and I'm not seeing it as procrastination, because at least it's not in my brain and then, oh yeah, okay, I'll get to that next week. Well, I've thought about it. I'm going to write it down so I don't have to think about it again. I'm going to unload it on my brain and off of my brain, and then And then I'll have my list, and you can check it off as you go. So, okay, so with the procrastination, Mel Robbins has this 5-second rule. So as soon as you recognize the need to make a conscious value-driven decision, you count backwards from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you physically move to take that action. So for instance, when I had the idea to make this video here on the neuroplasticity, after I had done the research, and then I had seen this 5-second rule, well, I knew I couldn't do it right at this second because I was busy, but then that's why I did the 5-second rule by writing the idea down. And so now, after I complete the video, I would check it off my list. And so that way, my mental list is, I'm not necessarily stopping the procrastination entirely, but what I am doing is I'm stopping the mental procrastination by writing it down, and then by having it on the list, then I know that it will eventually get checked off, and I don't need to keep circulating it in my brain and procrastinating that way. So within those 5 seconds, if you have an impulse to act on a goal, you must physically move within 5 seconds, or your brain will kill the idea. So that's the thought behind that 5-second rule by Mel Robbins. Now, the second thing to mention around procrastination is Peter Voogd's decision train. So he came up with the idea that you don't wait until you feel like doing something. Instead, you should do pre-planning and act first, decide second, and feel last. So most people are unsuccessful at taking action because they do the opposite. They feel first before making their decision. Now, if I think about my own decisions, oftentimes I'll make a decision to, take Drax, my dog, to the dog park. And so then I'll be in the dog park, but maybe emotionally and physically, I don't feel well. And so I don't feel like going to the dog park. Well, then I just end up driving home and I don't actually go. Well, Peter Voogd would instead say, do the pre-planning to make sure that you're going, let's say, to the dog park every Monday at 7. You decide you're going, and then when you're at the dog park, maybe feel how you are feeling when you're there, or feel how you're feeling after you've gone, instead of feeling it before, because then that may make us have negative feelings towards the activity, especially if we suffer from depression and anxiety. It's very typical that we have lost the pleasure in doing those simple things in life that had given us pleasure, and now they seem daunting, like a big huge chore that what's the point of doing? It's going to be work to do, and it's not going to give you any kind of satisfaction. And so by not even feeling that, you're kind of tricking your brain another way with that Peter Voogd's decision train. So you trick your brain into moving and acting as quickly as possible before your mind gets in the way. Another example I'll just use that comes to my mind when I read that, tricking your brain into moving and acting as quickly as possible before your mind gets in the way. When I asked my daughter Grace to, unload the dishwasher, that's usually her chore. It used to be a huge struggle. It's like, oh, I just got home from school. I need to do, I just want to relax, and a lot of excuses, and she'd start feeling like really not wanting to do it, and it looks like a huge chore. But recently, we've snapped out of it. Instead of even letting her finish her sentence with, oh, I'm so tired, and this is so much work, I can't do it. I just stop, I cut her off. I say, okay, you could have been done it already. And then she, just starts working and getting it done. Or we say, okay, do it already. And then you can, play with your doll or whatever. so then instead of focusing on the chore being daunting, now she's looking at it like, oh, okay, well, let's get moving, because then I get to do this new thing that I actually want to do next. And so it's almost like it's tricking her brain. She doesn't even have time to feel the tiredness and the not wanting to unload the dishwasher. So that's improved there. Okay, I wrote standards. It's supposed to say raise your standards. Now, you may be thinking of raise your standards with, how or what you get paid at work, or as far as a companion who you look for. But actually, it's very different. It is talking about raising your standards in a very different way. So Tony Robbins says, if you want to change your life, you have to raise your standards. So basically, you have to believe in and want a life that is better than what you currently have. You need to be raising your standards by be proactive, being proactive and taking preventative measures. So listen to this next quote, and this is what they mean by raising your standards. And it's not in the way that you typically would think it means to raise your standards. You raise your standards every time when you ignore the lizard brain. You say no to distractions, delay gratification, or choose a voluntary discomfort. So it's very much so with raising your standards with your higher self, with what you can achieve and what you want out of life, instead of getting pulled in by the distractions of life. Like, don't have that lizard brain. Don't want everything that everyone else has. Instead, say no to those distractions. Spend less time on your phone and the TV, and instead delay gratification. Maybe set yourself a goal to whatever you want to do at night, like a specific project before you have some kind of specific reward afterwards to have that delayed gratification. Choosing voluntary discomfort. Well, anything that is worth achieving takes hard work. And so we know that having that voluntary discomfort ultimately does lead to positive results. So that's what it means by raising your standards. If we put ourselves in uncomfortable and unknown territory, which is very extremely hard for us to do, especially dealing with anxiety and depression, but if we raise our standards in that sense, raising our standards not for other people, but we're raising our standards for ourselves, then we know that we no longer have these limiting beliefs that, okay, we can't go out in public because it gives us too much anxiety. Instead, we raise our standards and we're changing our thinking for ourselves, and we're choosing to have that voluntary discomfort because we know it will be better for us in the long run. And so that is very much so what raising your standards is about, is raising your standards for what you see yourself, your purpose of life to be, and raising your standards to what you can achieve. And every time we choose to have that voluntary discomfort, we are growing and learning in some way or another. And meditating is so wonderful, as it immediately changes the frequency of your brain waves. And it has been shown that after 5 years, this increases the size of white matter in the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex, remember, is that area in the front of our brain. It has a lot to do with our emotions, our logic, also our creativity, but the area that I was really focusing on is our control over our behaviors and our emotions. And so by having that, increasing that size of the white matter in their prefrontal cortex, we will have developed those positive neural pathways, those that will actually serve us and in life, and actually make us respond in logical, rational ways instead of, blowing up, which may be our primal instinct that may occur in a lower primate brain, or in someone that has a damaged prefrontal cortex, such as myself. Lastly, I'm just going to say this last note here. Your connections with your brain are constantly changing or becoming either stronger or weaker. The reason why your brain tends to not change as you become older is not because the brain is resistant, but it's because your mindset is resistant. And so even by knowing that the brain is not a rock, but instead it's like it's a ball of clay that we can add pieces to every time we have a new, set out on a new path, so to speak, or a new, learn some kind of new activity or subject. So even by knowing that the brain can be molded and grown, then we know that's our mindset. We know that we can grow and change and increase the synapses in our brain. So then we are not resistant to change. And younger people tend to change more easily, and this can be because their brains are very plastic. Maybe hence why the whole topic title is neuroplasticity. Maybe that's where it comes from. Their brains are very plastic. And so that's why younger people can change easily. If I think about my daughter and how well she's done with the divorce and switching between households, I think, wow, she really can adapt to change, and she really does. And then reading that their brains are very plastic, that made a lot of sense, that as we age, change doesn't come as easily. The brain does lose some of its plasticity, and we become more fixed in how we think, learn, and perceive. And so we start off as this beautiful ball of clay, and then over time, as we age, we slowly become more and more like a solid rock. Think of clay that your child has played with and has left out overnight. Well, now it's like a dry rock. So instead of letting it dry out, put your clay brain back in its container. Maybe you can think of meditating as putting it back in its container to keep it moldable, to keep it more like plastic instead of rock, because at least plastic, while I'm thinking of it as a metaphor, can be recycled and molded into something different. Okay, so with the new connections, this is just a summary here. We already talked about it. The new connections are made between active neurons to create alternate neural pathways. So before we had this primary path, and now we've made this alternate path here. We had this primary path, but we made a conscious decision to not go down that way, and therefore we have terminated that path. So sprouting, when a new axon and dendrite extensions allow existing neurons to form new connections. Okay, so here in this picture, we see the neural connections by neuron A and neuron B prior to degeneration. You can see that there's no sprouting occurring here, but in here with the B, we see the collateral sprouting of neuron B after damage to axon of neuron A. So something happened to neuron A, and then here we see the sprouting of this new axon and dendrite. But of course, in order for these to occur, we need to actually put in the work. If we stay stagnant in our current life and we don't learn or read anything new, well, then we're very much less likely to have this sprouting of this neuron B after damage. So it's very important, especially if you have been in an accident and have had some neuron damage, such as myself with the accident. It's very important to create, to allow for new connections to happen. And for new synapses to occur, this picture is just a great picture to kind of show the different areas of our life that we could grow and learn in. So of course we could take some classes academically, spiritually. We could practice either at a church or similar location, or just at home. Okay, we could travel, exploring a new place, a new culture. Could definitely create new synapses. Mathematics, painting, reading, science, drama, technology, more science. So, and of course that their language, there's tons of other areas that we could grow in as well. Now, for myself, what am I concluding with? What have I kind of gotten from this neuroplasticity research? And hopefully yourself, if you have dealt with pain, what can you maybe take from this? Well, I'm going to give myself permission to rewire my brain from this old paradigm that when I feel pain, it means that something's wrong in my body. Now, I've had this chronic pain in my neck and my spine since the snowboarding accident. And it's chronic pain that I have been told I'll always live with. But in my mind, that is just giving power to the pain, that every time I feel the pain, it means that something's wrong in my body. And I can't change it because it's a result of what happened 4 years ago. Well, instead, if I feel this chronic pain, I'm going to try and think that I'm going to try and change my thinking right away so that I don't put emphasis on it. So I try not to think about it so that I don't feel it. So that is the theory behind that, is that chronic pain is actually an unhelpful habit of the brain. So I've actually felt this pain for so long that it has been an unhelpful habit. So remember, habits take about 3 weeks to form. And then the more that you practice the habit, such as experiencing the pain, the stronger the neural pathway would be. Well, my chronic pain is very, very strong. And perhaps instead of focusing on it as much, and, I've been really trying to manage my pain for so long that it's very eye-opening to think, okay, well, how about I just try not to even think about it and not give power to it, and almost visualize that I'm already fixed. I've been visualizing in my head how my brain is, or sorry, how my spine is. Like I picture how it is according to the x-rays, and then I picture it how it should be. So I picture it shifting back over from the right side back to the middle, and then going from the straight, rigid position back to the C curve of the cervical spine. So I picture that, as well as my thoracic spine. I picture that correcting as well. So meditating, that's a part of visualizing and meditating. And so I'm trying to, in that sense, create that new brain synapse that now I'm fixed. And I've been doing that for a little while, and it certainly has not taken away the pain, but it has increased my mood, and the way I am, it has definitely changed the amount of pain I felt. I feel like it is more manageable, even though I don't think that it has even decreased in severity. So yes, that is my spiel about the chronic pain. Um, it's an unhelpful habit of the brain, and so if you think about it, oftentimes if I'm talking to someone, I won't feel the pain in that sense because I am distracted. I'm focused on something else. And so how I'm going to try and rewire my brain is when I do feel the pain, I'm going to recognize it as an unhelpful habit of something that occurred 4 years ago, and I'm going to hopefully think about, the next topic, anything else that comes into my brain to hopefully over time rewire that brain and um, feel the chronic pain less. And so I'm trying to trick my brain or distract my brain, just kind of like how a mother might distract her child after he's fallen down or she's fallen down and is crying. You might, say, "Oh, guess what?" And then they stop crying and say, "What?" And then you talk about something completely random. "Oh, well, I saw a moose cross the street when I was at Waskasoo. He actually used the crosswalk." So, and immediately that would take the child's attention off of that pain and, thinking about something else. And so if they're thinking about something else, then they're not feeling the pain. And so that is the thought behind that. Well, thank you so much, superstars, for joining me, and we will talk soon.